Imagine for a moment, a monk in ancient India. Life dedicated to simplicity, meditation, right? You'd think eating would be pretty straightforward.
You really would.
A bowl of rice, maybe some vegetables. But what if I told you that actually even eating came with these incredibly complex rules?
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just what they ate, but how they ate, when they ate, even who they got it from.
That's right. And these rules, they weren't just dreamed up in isolation. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the Pācittiya rules in early Buddhist monastic discipline, specifically about food.
Right.
And these regulations, you find them in the Vinaya, the code of conduct. They didn't just appear magically. They actually came from real-life stuff, misunderstandings, incidents, sometimes monks, not behaving quite as they should.
Yeah, the human element. So our mission today is to unpack these rules, try to understand the stories behind them, which are often quite surprising.
They really are.
And maybe discover some of the practical wisdom, the community thinking that shaped things way back then. You might even find some parallels to modern life that kind of jump out.
I think you definitely will. So where should we start? Maybe with the basics. How a monk even got their food.
Let's do it. Our first story here is tied to Pācittiya rule number 40. XL. It involves this monk who was living a really austere life.
Extremely austere.
He was a sabapasukuliko, only wore robes made from rags, and lived out in a cemetery near Vesely. And he'd take food that people had just left behind, discarded stuff.
Seems incredibly humble, doesn't it?
Totally. But the local people, they didn't quite get it. They started complaining, thinking he was eating, human flesh.
Yeah, a major misunderstanding. And it shows how fast public perception could lead to a formal rule.
Right.
This whole incident led directly to that Pācittiya rule against taking food through the mouth door, as they put it, unless it was properly dinat.
Dinat. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Properly given, was that like super specific?
Oh, incredibly specific.
Right.
And that's the key point. Dinan meant the food had to be received in a very particular way.
How so?
Either directly by the monk's body, like into their hands or bowl, or by something connected to their body, maybe a cloth laid out, or it had to be handed over by someone standing within arm's reach. Anything else just wasn't considered given.
Wow. So it wasn't just about not stealing, it was much more about the formal act of receiving.
Exactly. It codified that reliance on generosity. It protected the Sangha's reputation, avoiding any hint of taking things improperly, even accidentally. Trust was fundamental.
And yet there was that little exception, wasn't there? Something about water?
Yes. Amidst all this strictness, monks were allowed to take water by themselves just for cleaning their teeth.
It's a small thing, but it kind of shows a practical side, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows the Vinaya wasn't just rigid rules. It allowed for, basic daily needs. Practicality mattered.
Okay, so that covers receiving food. But what about when generosity itself caused problems? That brings us to Pācittiya 34.
Ah, yes, when good intentions go a bit sideways.
We've got two really quite sad stories here. First, there's Kandamata, a laywoman, very devoted. She baked these cakes for her husband.
A loving gesture.
But then monks came by, one after another, and they kept taking the cake, saying, "Oh, just a little," until none were left. And the consequence, her husband got angry and actually took another wife.
It's heartbreaking. It shows how, seemingly small actions by the monks could have massive ripple effects in the lay community.
And then there's the other story, the travelers who got robbed.
Right. Similar issue, different context. Monks took way too much parched grain meal sattu, which a family had prepared as provisions for their journey. Because the monks took so much, the family ran out, got delayed trying to find more, and ended up being robbed.
That's a heavy consequence just from accepting too much food. So how do they make a rule about that without seeming ungrateful for donations?
Well, these incidents led to a very clear rule. If a host offers cakes or sattu and says, "Take as much as you like," a monk should only accept 2 or 3 bowlfuls.
2 or 3, that's it.
That's the limit. Taking more is an offense, a Pācittiya.
And there's another detail, right, about telling other monks.
Crucial detail. After accepting those 2 or 3 bowls, the monk had to, upon leaving, let other monks know they'd received food from that particular house.
Why? To stop everyone hitting up the same place.
Exactly. It prevented putting too much burden on one generous family, and the food they did accept, that limited amount, was meant to be shared among the monks too.
So it's about moderation, respecting the donor, and also kind of managing resources fairly within the Sangha.
Precisely. It's about sustainable relationships with the lay supporters, preventing donor fatigue, you could say.
Okay, let's shift from individuals to groups. Pācittiya 31, this involves a public lodging house.
And our old friends, the Vagga, the group of 6 monks.
These guys seem to pop up a lot when rules are needed.
They certainly do. They were staying at this public lodging in Pācittiya, a place meant for all travelers. But they kept eating there, day after day, basically using up the food intended for everyone.
Taking over the place, essentially.
Pretty much. And people complained, naturally. It wasn't fair. So the rule became, generally, a monk should only eat 1 meal at a public lodging house like that.
Just 1 meal, okay? But then, like we saw before, there's nuance. An exception came up because of someone quite important.
Yes, the Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples. He was traveling, fell ill, and physically couldn't leave the lodging house after just 1 meal.
Right, so what happened?
His situation led to the exception. If a monk is sick, they are allowed to stay and eat more than once.
It shows that compassion again, doesn't it? Balancing the need to prevent abuse with, well, basic human needs when someone's unwell.
It really does. It prevents the rules from causing undue hardship. Very practical, very human.
Okay, sticking with groups, let's look at Pācittiya 32. This one's about group feasts.
This one has origins with Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, who caused a schism, and his followers.
What were they doing?
They were going around soliciting food as a large group, basically imposing themselves on households. People started complaining again, saying, these monks are everywhere demanding food together.
Not a good look for the Sangha.
Definitely not. So the general rule was laid down, basically no group meals if 4 or more monks are invited to eat together at a specific household.
4 or more, okay. Seems restrictive, but I have a feeling there are exceptions coming.
Oh, are there ever? This rule is fascinating because of the sheer number of exceptions, the samayas, or specific occasions where it doesn't apply.
Yep.
It really shows how pragmatic the Vinaya could be.
All right, lay them on us. What were the exceptions?
Well, first off, sickness. If monks were ill, eating together was permitted. Makes sense. Easier to manage.
Okay, practical. What else?
The robe offering season. When lay people were actively giving robes, often meals came with that. Also, if monks were involved in communal robe-making activities.
Right, community activities.
Travel was a big one. If they were going on a long journey, say, half a yojana or more.
How far is a yojana, roughly?
It varies, but maybe around 7 miles, so a journey of over 3.5 miles. Also, boat travel, getting on the boat, being on the boat, getting off group meals were okay then, too.
For convenience and, well, probably safety in numbers sometimes.
Exactly. Also, great assemblies, like when lots of monks gathered from all over to see the Buddha.
Like a big conference, almost?
Sort of.
Yeah.
And interestingly, if they were invited by other ascetics from different traditions, perhaps.
So, this rule looks strict on the surface, but it's actually incredibly flexible.
It's a beautiful balancing act. Maintaining discipline, not burdening lay supporters, avoiding the appearance of greed.
But also recognizing the real needs of communal living, travel, sickness, special occasions.
Precisely. It's adaptive.
Let's move into rules about how individual monks ate or handled food. Pācittiya 33. The successive meal. This involves a poor laborer.
Yes, in Vasali. This man had saved up his extra wages, a really significant amount for him, and out of deep faith, he invited the Buddha and the whole Sangha for a meal.
A huge act of generosity.
Immense. But the problem was, many monks had already eaten earlier that day, maybe at another invitation, so when they came to his meal, they only took tiny portions, or some didn't eat at all.
Oh no. How did the laborer react?
He was deeply distressed. He felt his offering wasn't good enough, that he couldn't satisfy the monks he revered. It caused him real pain.
That's awful. So the rule came about from that.
Yes. Eating a successive meal, basically. Accepting and eating a second invited meal after you've already committed to one without doing it properly became an offense.
But what if you got invited somewhere else unexpectedly? Life happens.
Good question. And it did happen. The Venerable Ananda himself faced this. He was offered a second meal and felt uneasy about it.
So what was the solution?
The Buddha clarified a procedure called vikappatva. It essentially means making an arrangement, formally waiving your right to the first invitation, or making the second one permissible under specific conditions.
So there was a way around it, but it had to be done formally.
Exactly. It wasn't just about not offending the first host, but also about mindfulness, not appearing greedy, and respecting the effort donors put in while still allowing for real-world social situations.
Okay, next up, Pācittiya 35. This involves a Brahmin host and the idea of surplus food.
Right. So this Brahmin invites monks for a meal. They eat, and he formally indicates the meal is over. They're dismissed. The term is pavarito.
Okay, meal's done.
But then some of these monks went off to other houses and ate more food or took food away with them.
Oh, dear. How did the Brahmin feel?
Not great. He complained, feeling like his hospitality wasn't respected or maybe wasn't enough, again, damaging that crucial lay-monastic relationship.
So another rule. Don't eat more after you've been formally dismissed from a meal.
Correct. Eating more after being pavarito is an offense, but there's a really important exception here, atirita.
Pācittiya. Surplus. What does that mean in practice?
It refers to food that is clearly left over. Either the donor has explicitly said, "This is extra, please take it," or it's food remaining from a sick monk's portion that they couldn't finish.
Ah, so it's designated leftover.
Precisely. This atirita food can be consumed by other monks without it being an offense. It's not a loophole to just keep eating.
It sounds like smart resource management, actually. Preventing waste.
It absolutely is. It respects the host, avoids the appearance of monks being insatiable, and makes sure perfectly good food doesn't go to waste, especially if someone was sick. Very practical.
And this next one, Pācittiya 36, seems to go deeper than just food. It's about malicious intent.
Yes, the malicious invitation. The story goes that a monk had been criticized, perhaps justly, for some misconduct.
Okay.
Later on, this monk deliberately goes and offers some really nice appetizing food to the monk who criticized him. But he does it knowing that the critic had already eaten and been formally dismissed from a meal.
Why would he do that?
His intention wasn't generosity. It was hoping to find fault. He wanted the critic to accept and eat the food so he could then turn around and accuse him of breaking the rule about eating after dismissal.
Wow. That's manipulative, using the rules as a weapon.
Exactly. And the Vinaya recognized this danger. The rule is, if a monk intentionally offers food to an already fed and dismissed monk specifically to find fault, and the other monk eats it, the one who offered it commits the offense.
So the offense is on the one with the bad intention.
Yes. It shows the system wasn't just about the external act, but the motivation behind it. It's designed to prevent malice and internal conflict within the community. It's really about ethical conduct, not just table manners.
That's quite profound. Okay, let's talk timing. Pācittiya 37, eating at the wrong time.
This came up when some monks went to a festival in Rajagaha. People offered them food, but it was after midday.
And other monks noticed.
They did, and they complained it wasn't considered proper.
So the rule became, don't eat certain foods after midday.
Pretty much. Eating solid or soft food, the main categories at the wrong time, or vikali, became an offense.
And vikali is specifically defined as?
From midday until dawn the next day, that whole period.
Why this specific time restriction? Was it just asceticism?
Partly discipline and promoting mindfulness, yes. But it also served a social function. It clearly distinguished the monks' eating habits from lay life, prevented them from constantly seeking food, and maintained a good reputation. It ensured they weren't seen eating at all hours.
Right, perception again. Okay, almost there. Pācittiya 38, the forest monk's stash.
This involves a monk named Bella Hasiso. He was actually a non-dis preceptor, a respected figure, and lived in the forest.
What was he doing?
He had a system. He'd collect alms food, maybe dry some of it out, store it, and then rehydrate and eat it the next day or later.
Sounds practical. Less time needed for the daily alms round, right?
Exactly his thinking.
Yeah.
But other monks saw this and questioned it. Is it okay to store food received one day and eat it on another?
And the answer was?
The answer, in the form of this rule, was no. Eating sanidhikarika food stored overnight after being received became an offense for general daily food.
But why? If he wasn't burdening anyone, it seems counterintuitive to discourage self-sufficiency.
It does from our modern view, perhaps.
Yeah.
But the principle here was about non-attachment and reliance. Storing food day to day was seen as a form of hoarding, a lack of faith in receiving sustenance the next day. It encouraged constant dependence on the alms round and the generosity of the lay community.
So it reinforces that core monastic ideal of detachment.
Precisely, though we should remember other rules did allow storing certain specific things for longer periods, like medicines or perhaps grains under specific conditions. This rule was mainly about the daily meal food.
Okay, last one for this deep dive. Pācittiya 39, soliciting delicacies. And guess who's back?
Let me guess.
The Vagga.
The very same. This time, they were going around asking for and eating what were considered delicacies just for their own enjoyment. And, predictably, people complained. Monks living it up, enjoying luxuries. It didn't sit well.
So the rule is, if a monk isn't sick, they shouldn't solicit specific delicacies just for themselves and eat them.
Correct. Doing so is an offense.
What counted as a delicacy? Was it just fancy food?
The texts list them quite specifically. Ghee, fresh butter, various oils like sesame or mustard oil, honey, molasses, or sugar.
Okay.
And also fish, meat, milk, and curds.
Huh. Some of those sound pretty normal, like milk or curds. Why were they restricted?
It wasn't necessarily that they were inherently bad, but actively soliciting them for personal enjoyment suggested a craving, a lack of simplicity. It was about preventing monks from developing expensive tastes or appearing greedy, maintaining that ascetic ideal.
But health was still important.
Absolutely, and that's the crucial exception again. If a monk was sick, they were allowed to ask for and consume these things if needed for their health.
So it's about discouraging luxury and greed, promoting simplicity, but always prioritizing genuine well-being.
Exactly, it's that constant balancing act.
Wow. So when you look at all these rules together, what seems like maybe a random list of don'ts actually starts to look like this really nuanced and quite practical system.
It really does. These Pācittiya rules, they all came from somewhere. Real interactions, real problems, real perceptions within the community.
And they show, I think, a deep understanding of, well, people, how communities work, that delicate dance between the monks and the lay supporters who kept them going.
Definitely. The aims seem clear: preventing scandal, making sure resources were shared fairly, encouraging discipline and mindfulness, and, just fostering respect all around.
And listening to these ancient stories, you can't help but see echoes today, can you? Insights into mindfulness, thinking about others, balancing ideals with just, well, practical reality. That stuff shapes any community, even now.
Absolutely. The principles resonate.
So here's something to think about. Consider the unspoken rules in your own life, maybe in your workplace or family, especially around things like shared food, resources, or even just social invitations. What little incident, what practical need, or what fear of perception might have actually created those rules maybe generations ago?
And maybe ask yourself, do those rules still serve the purpose they were originally designed for? Or
Yeah.
have things changed?
Yeah, something to chew on.